Do you want to know what it takes to be a freak like an Olympian? We're going to go over all those key characteristics in strength training, and we're going to start right now. So let's think about the traditional thought of strength and what that means for athletes. A lot of people will look at strength and all they think about is Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the 70s. These big, huge, hulking individuals, they're strong. And so they look at those athletes and they go, well, my kid's playing tennis, my kid's swimming. So those individuals don't need that type of strength. They don't need strength. But in reality, what we have to do is start to view strength in different formalities. If I'm sprinting within a 100-meter race, I have to have a lot of strength to come out of the blocks. But then also as I'm placing my feet and reacting, I have to have a lot of strength specific to those movements, okay? And so that's how we actually have to look at it. If I'm a swimmer and I have a stroke, if I have power output from my stroke, that requires a large amount of strength. And so we've got to look at it through those different areas, through those different columns. And so we like to look at it as field sports classification, okay? So that would be lacrosse, football. And then we can look at it through combat sports classification. That might be boxing, judo, wrestling, MMA. Or we look at it through the power sports classification. That's going to be sprint cycling, throwing, gymnastics. Actually, to a very high degree, is going to be a power-based classification. And then that leads us into those racket/court sports, so volleyball, tennis, badminton, squash. Those all have very specific types of strength needs to be successful and to be healthy and to produce a large amount of force specific to those muscular actions. And then we can finish it off with the cyclical endurance. So this might be a marathoner, a cross-country runner, a 5K, a rower, or even a canoeer, somewhere along these lines, some road cycling, okay? That's where cyclical endurance will come into play. But we have to look at strength through the lens of each realm, okay? So it's not just Arnold Schwarzenegger walking around doing strict preacher curls, which that is a form of strength, by the way, but also we have to look at the specific movement of the specific sport and then train those areas to a degree that will then transfer over to their athletic realm for optimal success. We're gonna go through the strength characteristics that every single sport needs as quickly as possible. Strength characteristics transfer over to various motor patterns. And that first key characteristic is going to be blast impulse. So how much force can you produce in a very, very limited period of time? Think about jumps, sprinting, throwing. This is where blast impulse comes into play. That takes us into sustained impulse. So sustained impulse is going to be a little bit longer than a blast impulse. This is situations in sports like scrambling and wrestling. Maybe it's 15 seconds, maybe it's 10 seconds, but it's a little bit longer period of time where you have to produce a large amount of force. It could even be similar to when you're making contact on the football field. So you make contact and then for a second or two, you have to force that contact to manipulate your opponent so that you can get into a better position. So that next key characteristic is going to be power 15 plus. This is going to be like sprint cyclists. They have to go around a track for 15 to 20 seconds each time with a large amount of power output into the pedals. Same if we're thinking about wrestlers with longer scrambles, 20 to 25 second scrambles, and even weightlifters to a point where they hit a big clean. They stand up that clean after they grind it out. They stand there and they try to regroup for 3 to 4 seconds before they hit that big jerk. Then they have to recover with that jerk. That might happen over 15 to 20 seconds. That takes us into power endurance. This could be a subcategory of power-based training, but I believe it needs to be its own specific characteristic. Wrestlers need power endurance over a long period of time. Any combat athlete, 5 minutes of a round in the UFC needs to have power endurance. Same with football players. If they're playing 3-4 quarters, they need to have power endurance at the end of that game so that they can manipulate their opponent. Even if we're talking about ice hockey, 2 to 3 periods of play gets to be very, very fatiguing, and you have to train that power endurance characteristic. And then finally, that takes us into that endurance 90 plus. This is going to take a long period of time. So if we're doing something like an 800-meter run, or we're a marathoner, or we're a rower, or we're a cyclist out on the road. These are all endurance-based sports. And so we need to train a little bit differently based off of endurance 90 plus. What I like to do is look through the lens of all of these different types of strength characteristics and then pick the top 3 if we have multiple sport athletes. So that takes us into field sports. Let's identify those field sports. We're gonna have lacrosse. We're gonna have American football. We're gonna have field hockey. We'll have soccer to a point. Okay, so we can identify what those field sports are gonna be. And then that next step is, all right, what strength characteristics fall under that umbrella, under that column? And that takes us into sustained impulse. Okay, sustained impulse is extremely fast, explosive work, a large amount of force in a shorter period of time. And then that also leads into Power 15 plus. So if we're training in that Power 15 plus area, we might have a play that lasts 15 seconds. We might have some sense of flow in lacrosse that lasts over 15 seconds, and you need to produce a large amount of power. And that also has a supporting role with endurance of 90 plus, okay? So if we're playing a game that's 90 minutes, we need to have some endurance underneath to make sure that we can handle that long sustained output. And that takes us directly now into that next step. So we go into identifying that specific sport, then we identify the specific characteristics, and then we can lead into identifying the specific exercises. So technical coordination, we're trying to improve sustained impulse. We're trying to train in Power 15 plus. We've got to do technical coordination movements like weightlifting exercises, power cleans, full cleans, power snatches, behind the neck jerks, all of my favorites, right, that are going to help you be more coordinated. And then we have to do plyometric work. We should be doing bilateral and unilateral plyometric work that's going to help us coordinate at a very high rate. Now, as we start to dig deeper into those specific strength characteristics, that's stuff that's going to help us with that Power 15 plus. We even want to focus on absolute strength movements. A lot of coaches will shy away from pushing your back squat, push your front squat, push your bench press. It'll help you be a better athlete. And that's where a key factor comes into play with that Power 15 plus. Then that leads us into some reflexive work as well. We need to coordinate rapidly from crazy positions, break down the sport, and create 3 to 4 step drills that are reflexive that will help you coordinate very, very fast out on the field. And then finally, that supporting factor, the endurance 90 plus. We need to do things like go in the sauna, cyclical endurance like getting on the assault bike, doing things like long, slow distance, okay? Even doing things with a sled for 15 minutes will help improve that overall endurance 90 plus. So power sports. Power sports have to be identified as sprint cycling, weightlifting, throwing, to a point even powerlifting. Ironically, it's a little bit more of a gray area, but if we can think about being as explosive as possible. With power, it's better to look at it through the term impulse, which is producing a large amount of force in a very restricted period of time. So with these sports identified, and with the fact that we understand what type of energy output or what type of force output we need, we can now look at what strength characteristics are necessary to train for a power-based sport like sprint cycling, like weightlifting. So we have to think about first, blast impulse, that boom, that right away, explosive as possible, jumping, sprinting, all of those areas, right? That's gonna help with power-based sports. Just like sustained impulse, so a little bit longer periods of force production, a little bit longer periods of force application. That's gonna be sustained impulse. And then finally, Power 15 plus. If we have Power 15 plus, we know that in sprint cycling, the race might be longer and likely is much longer than 15 seconds. And so that does come into play. And even if we think about someone like a power lifter, they take their low bar back squat right out of the rack, they get set, and they're here for 5 seconds, and then they do that back squat to this depth, and then they come up, and it's about 15 seconds that might last. So we need to be training with that Power 15 plus in this strength characteristic identification to develop power-based sports. So that takes us into combat sports. So what are combat sports? Right off the bat, we can identify wrestling, boxing, MMA, judo, jiu-jitsu. Okay, so clearly we have an understanding of what those combat sports are gonna be, but now we can look at what are the top 3 strength characteristics that you're gonna need when you're actually training for these combat sports. And that will be sustained impulse as the number 1 thing. power endurance as the number 2 thing, and then traditional endurance as that supporting underlying factor, okay? So sustained impulse, that's gonna be very, very explosive. Power endurance, that's gonna be late in the match. You can still be explosive. And then endurance means that you can hold your heart rate at a high level, let's say 90% for a long period of time, and still produce force. So what kind of training supports those 3 types of strength characteristics? The first thing, if we mention sustained impulse, technical coordination movements like cleans, like snatches, like dumbbell snatches, like trap bar jumps, like behind the neck jerks, these will factor into combat sports. And if we can train our individuals to be more explosive, they can then dominate on the mat if they're in wrestling, or in the octagon if they're in MMA. And what happens then, we can also get creative. We can use on-the-minute tricks. We can use higher rep sets, shorter rest periods, and still increase that overall sustained impulse while also catering into that power endurance. For endurance-based work, we need to do high-intensity interval-based training. We need to do sprint interval training. We need to do LSD work for long periods of time, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, to really develop that endurance base. And then ideally, where everything sort of gets molded together is that we're doing plyometric exercises like stair jumps, like hurdle hops, single leg bounds. And we're doing plyometric exercises even while we're under fatigue. We're doing reflexive exercises even while we're under fatigue. One of the things, and people are probably gonna comment down below and say, hey Dane, you shouldn't be doing plyometrics or reflexive exercises when you're fatigued. But guess what? The combat world is about doing explosive things while you're fatigued. So I recommend doing these things so that you get better at them while you're under stress. Even doing things that are cognitive while you're under a lot of fatigue and a lot of stress. And that in turn will be one of those key areas that can then improve what you're doing in your actual combat sport. Now that takes us into the racket sports and baseball. So anything that has an arm swing, right? Anything that has an arm swing is gonna be very complicated. It's also gonna be really, really, really explosive. So now we identify racket sports, baseball. Now we work into what are those specific sports? I mentioned baseball, right? So you have baseball, you have tennis, you have badminton, you have sports like highlight, things that are really, really, really fast where you need that dynamic trunk control. And that takes us into our strength characteristics. We're gonna have blast impulse. Sorry, baseball players, but reacting to a fly ball is blast impulse. You have to be explosive and fast to track that down. Same thing if I'm a tennis player and I'm returning Serena Williams hitting a serve, I better be able to react very, very quickly. So we've got to train that blast impulse. We've got to train that power 15 plus if we've got a long volley. We also have to train that power endurance. If we can produce a lot of power over a long period of time, let's say 85 to 90% of our peak power over a long time frame, that's going to help us compete really well over a long period of time. And that takes us now into the training. We've got to do technical coordination movements. So we have to be able to decelerate weight very rapidly. If I'm a tennis player and I hit a power clean, let's say I hit a power clean and I have to stop in that power clean, that's going to train my dynamic trunk control and I'm going to throw the brakes on fast. We also want to train plyometric movements and decelerative plyometrics. So like a drop lunge. Again, I want to talk about this tennis player, this theoretical tennis player. If they have to make a play and slam on the brakes and have that dynamic trunk control while they're making that shot and also coordinate their legs rapidly, they need to be doing plyometric work. They need to be doing strength training work with technical coordination movements. They need to be doing reflexive-based exercises to improve that rate of coordination. And then finally, they also need to be doing plyometrics under some sense of fatigue. What I think you should be doing as a strength coach or as an athlete is you have specific days where your entire purpose is being as explosive and as reactive as possible. Okay, so you're taking longer rest periods. And then there's other days where you might have more volume in your training day and you have to exhibit and express that explosiveness while you're somewhat fatigued. Okay, so that's gonna go hand in hand, and in turn that's gonna lead to more precise coordination that will help you with the racket sports and with baseball. So that takes us into our next big factor, and that's gonna be cyclical endurance. So cyclical endurance sports, it's gonna be rowing, it's gonna be swimming, that's gonna be running marathons, running 5Ks, running 10Ks, and any other example of long, slow, distance-based sports that take a large amount of time. Ironman, right, triathletes. All of those sports, even hiking, are gonna fall in line with cyclical-based endurance. So we identify what those specific sports are. Now we gotta go into the characteristics. Those key characteristics are gonna be Power 15 plus. Okay, a lot of you might be like, well, how's Power 15 plus come into an endurance-based sport? But think about this. If I have a 1,500 meter runner or a 5,000 meter runner, and I can make them a little bit more explosive, okay, if I can make them a little bit more explosive and produce a little bit more power output, their strides will be longer, they'll take less strides, they'll use less energy, and in turn, they'll run faster. Same thing for swimmers, same thing for triathletes, hikers. All of these areas will benefit from that Power 15 plus. But then also we have to prioritize. We want power endurance. If we can produce a large amount of power over a very long time frame, let's say 5-7 minutes, okay? That's not very, very long, but it's pretty long. 5-7 minutes of a large amount of power output, say as a rower, if I can do that each time then over 5 minutes, if I have my absolute max stroke output here at 100%, if I can do 85 to 90% of that for 7 minutes, I'm probably gonna be pretty freaking good at my sport, right? Then we go off that power endurance where we can hold that high level for 5 to 7 minutes, and that leads into just endurance 90 plus, okay? So endurance 90 plus is gonna be able to execute something for 30 minutes, for 60 minutes. Think about hiking. If we're doing competitive hiking and we're trying to climb a mountain or something like this, or climb a very steep hill, right? And we're out on the trail, we might have to do that over an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours. It might be very long. It might be over a very long time frame. So we have to train in that range of 30 minutes to 60 minutes at a higher heart rate to make sure that we can develop that really sound baseline, that sound foundation of endurance-based training. And so that leads us into those specific exercises now. Remember, I just want everybody to keep remembering this. It's taking that sport classification, okay? So we have endurance-based athletes, right? And then it's diving into what are those specific sports? We identified the specific sports. Then the next key step, what are the top 3 strength characteristics for those specific sports? Now the next key step, what does that mean in the weight room? So we're just mining down with this knowledge, and that takes us into, we still need to do technical coordination movements even for endurance-based sports because we want to train with that Power 15 plus. So if we can do triples, sets of 4, sets of 5 with power cleans or with power snatches, we can help improve our mobility, our lower back strength, our hip strength, our glute power output. That's going to lead to less strokes in the pool. That's going to lead to less strides on the track. And so we understand that technical coordination movements will transfer to endurance-based sports. And then I love training unilateral absolute strength work. So you could pick up our single leg roller at garagestrength.com and train with that single leg squat for 10 to 12 reps. If you're a hiker, if you're a runner, you can use dumbbells, you can use body weight and do higher reps, but you're still training that unilateral absolute strength. And I also recommend getting into some reflexive based work when you're trying to improve your power endurance. And then obviously you need to do some rowing, you need to do some biking, you need to do some long, slow distance swimming, some long, slow distance hiking, some long, slow distance running, all of these things. Even if you're doing a very, very long hill sprints, okay? You could time yourself. I'm gonna run hill sprints at 65 to 70% for the next 45 straight minutes. That will help with that LSD work. That's gonna help with that overall endurance 90 plus, and that's gonna help you dominate in that endurance world. So specific training for these sports are gonna require a lot of technical coordination. That means power snatches, power cleans, full cleans, one box snatches, jerks, behind the neck jerks, push presses. Those technical coordination movements are tremendously gonna help power-based sports, just like absolute strength work will. Low bar back squats, high bar back squats, front squats, zombie squats, single leg squats. Those will all improve power-based sports, along with plyometric work and reflexive work. If we can get people to be extremely strong with absolute strength, and then we teach them how to rapidly coordinate with plyometrics and with reflexive movements, guess what? We have freak athletes that are gonna dominate in the power world. So we break down each specific sport and each athlete into those specific strength characteristic columns. We identify the top 3 columns that they need to focus on for their various sports. Or if we have an individual athlete who only plays one sport, let's think about a discus thrower, now we can go into the top 1 or top 2 positions, and maybe that third characteristic is going to be a supporting characteristic that feeds into those top 2 areas. And we even provided example movements that help improve each specific type of sport dependent upon that characteristic. So it's taking those exercises specifically in the weight room, and it's key to understand where each exercise can plug and play. And that's gonna help you as a strength coach as well as an athlete. And that's exactly how we set up our brand new app, Peak Strength. And what we did is we identified all of these different sports: badminton, basketball, throwing, football, soccer, and we break down everything, track and field, every sport that you could think of, and we broke them down into these key characteristics, and then we built programs around that, and we even have AI factored into the app so it learns what type of athlete you are. It learns how much load you can handle from exercise to exercise. We even have rest periods inside of this, and it's periodized exactly based off of parabolic periodization. So you can set that peak date and then work backwards so that you can have peak strength as you go into that optimal competition where you want to dominate all of your opponents. Okay, so we even have in here, we can go into, okay, here's lower body strength. Let's go into upper body strength. First exercise is gonna be gorilla push-ups, so we can do explosive push-ups here. That's gonna prime that nervous system. Let's go back here. All right, we got incline neutral grip dumbbell bench, okay? Now that's gonna teach us exactly what we need to do. We've got our great NCAA champion showing us how to execute that properly, and then we can even work backwards here and get into single arm lat pull down. Okay, so these are all examples of how we work through the entire set. I want to show you that lower body, and we can even see here, we've got power clean plus clean, okay? So if we want to watch the video, we can click on watching the video. Now we have that demonstration. Oh, we want some technique cues. All right, well, guess what, guys? There's somebody in here telling you how to execute the clean as well as you possibly can. And we're doing it with the #2 ranked weightlifter in the entire world. So we're gonna go into what's a power clean versus a full clean, clean technique, common clean mistakes. So you have access to all this inside of Peak Strength. If you wanna pick up our brand new app, Peak Strength, click on the link down below, head over to peakstrength.app so you can get swole today. And if you want more content, make sure you check out our brand new YouTube channel, Peak Strength, where we dive deep into the weeds with specific sports to help you guys have a better understanding of overall sports performance. Because remember, freaks, if you guys want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.